good to be here. Gracias. Thank you, Lato Kamati, to everybody that's joined us. We have a very special program here. We're going to be reading from this wonderful book, a Tia Chucha Press book, In the Courtyard of the Moon by the Quiché Mayan poet from Guatemala, Humberto Acabal. And well, we have the translator here, also a good friend of Humberto, who has passed already, but we have Miguel Rivera. Welcome.
Good evening, Luis. Thank you for having me at
Yes,
this place.
of course. And me and Miguel actually go way back too. We're good old friends, so this works out perfect that we can do this. We want people to buy the book and share the book. It's an indigenous voice from part of the world that does not get heard in this country. So we really want to push this wonderful book. Before we start, I just want to point out that Tia Chuchas is in a major, Tia Chucha Centro Cultural is in a major fundraising mode. We're trying to raise $75,000 before the end of the year. We're like at 60,000, which is an amazing thing. Please, if you can donate, you can help us out on our website. There's a donate button. Please give. We want to make sure we reach our goals before the end of the year. Now, I'd like to see if we can start. And what we're going to do is Miguel is going to read the Spanish, and when it pops up, the Quiché, and then I'll follow up with the English. Miguel, you want to say a few words though about?
Humberto's poetry is like a tremendous gift to us, and a lot of the troubles, a lot of the configuration that we're in right now that gives us a lot of worry and conflict. I think there are seeds in the native cultures that allow us to get through. And so to me, this is like an incredible resource that was shared with me in particular and shared with all of us to figure out how to get through these challenging times.
So, you know, I want to jump on that because to me that's such an important thing. People think that indigenous people are old, ancient people, their cultures are no longer relevant. This ancestral wisdom, as we call it, is so relevant today, probably more so. It's always been relevant. But the indigenous minds, the original peoples, how they thought, how the complexity of their thought, because people like to say they were very low level. They had a very complex relationship with nature, their own nature, with the nature of the divine, with others. I think it's important to point out that Humberto Acabal, as an indigenous man, as an indigenous poet, is bringing in that way of thinking into the world.
Yeah, it's about relationship. You know, it's about really relationship, not only to yourself but to the world around you. So exactly. Nothing is objectified in a way. So and when you're not objectified, you're also accountable to yourself and to those around you and everything around you. So
beautiful. So maybe we can start with one of the poems.
Okay, the first one is called Para quienes, page 18. Right? Para quienes no hablan nuestras lenguas, somos invisibles.
For those who do not speak our languages, we are invisible. In that poem, there's so much there. The density, the simplicity of the words carries so much density. Yeah. And this is what I love about when you read them. Now, he's got longer poems, but his smaller poems are so beautifully poetic because of that. They're condensed knowledge, condensed thoughts, condensed meaning. This is a meaningful thing. And I'm glad that we're able to do it, but people should recognize that when you're reading these kind of poems, they're not simple. They're very complex ideas in simple form.
These poems are like those little gel capsule dinosaurs you buy. You know, a tiny little thing, and when it gets inside of you, it just explodes in all this thing.
That's a very beautiful way of saying it.
To me, it's like, so let's go to page 34, all right?
Yeah.
We'll continue. So we're going to navigate here some of the political and cultural history of Guatemala, allowing some of the essences of what happened before conquest, after conquest, and even the 40 years of civil war in Guatemala that we are still in the throes of right now, that we haven't recovered from that. You know?
And maybe after we read this, you might want to say a little bit about what's going on in Guatemala.
Yeah.
You know, summarize what you're saying, but also what things right now.
Yeah.
Okay.
En la voz. En las voces de los árboles viejos reconozco las de mis abuelos, veladores de siglos, su sueño está en las raíces.
In the voices of the old trees, I recognize those of my grandfathers. guardians of the centuries. Their dreams are in the roots. Whew. That's powerful. The dreams are in the roots. Beautiful. What a beautiful image. Life growing out of the roots of things, but the dreams of all our ancestral powers, energies are there.
Yeah. And there's something about a return to source in roots. I mean, he uses roots in many of his poems. We have some other poems, but to me, there's an important way of returning to source that's common to all of us. Doesn't matter where we come from on this earth, we are sourced in the original unknown, and that darkness that holds the roots, and the roots is like the first manifestation. So to me, it's,
You know, and one thing about that is that I know we live in these nation states. Everybody's we got passports and everything, but they're recent. What really is important to me is that we should all recognize that our home is really the planet.
yeah,
Our home
Yeah.
is this earth. Everybody's welcomed by this earth. Everybody, there's no borders. Borders are made up. Borders are political things, home markets and everything else. What the indigenous people carry is that the earth is their home. Wherever they go, they're always at home.
Yeah.
Because they know that this is why they migrate. They can migrate. Migracy is not a problem except in the modern world, because we're imprisoned by nations. And now if you have a famine, people would go off and migrate to where there wasn't a famine. Now they're stuck in their countries. They have to be refugees. They have to starve or whatever. And it's because of the way the world gets carved up. But I think this poem gets to, again, the very source.
yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful.
We're going to go to some of the poems that were written in Guatemala. There was 40 years of civil war. And so it had a tremendous impact on the culture and on the peoples. And so these are some of the poems that were written about the war in Guatemala. Viento callado. Al día siguiente de lo que había ocurrido, el viento pasó callado. No se atrevía a contar lo que había visto. El miedo caminaba en el aire. Así amaneció aquel día cuando la guerra llegó a estas tierras.
Silent wind. The day after it happened, the wind went by quietly. It did not dare tell what it had seen. Fear walked in the air. That is how the day began, when the war came to these lands. I wonder if you could speak a little bit about that 40-year war that is still going on, really.
It's really complicated, but it's all based on control of the resources of the land. In Guatemala, like in many Latin American countries, a lot of the fertile land was completely confiscated from the people. When the Spanish first arrived in Guatemala, in many Latin American countries, they were amazed because the food was not locked up. The food was held communally. Nobody owned the land. The land was held communally. So one of the first that they first did is they moved everybody out of the fertile land, and that gets transferred to this day. So in Guatemala in particular, the United Fruit Company controls something like 60% of all the most fertile arable land. And at one point in time in 1953, there was a democratic election, and Jacobo Arbenz, who was elected then, decided to nationalize all the territory, all the land that was controlled by United Fruit Company. So the United Fruit Company, backed by the CIA, engineered a coup in Guatemala in 1954. And the root of 40 years of civil war started from that coup in 1954, all the way to 1996, which is when the peace accords signed. And to this day, a lot of the communities have never recovered from that war because of the control is still maintained by the oligarchy in many respects of those lands.
And people are also still today, the poverty is so bad that there are also what you would call ecological refugees, because of all the land has not been properly taken care of. There's so much destruction. And then there's also a lot of corruption.
Oh, massive.
Yeah.
And now,
Well,
a lot of the cartels have set up shop
Yeah,
in
I know.
Guatemala. So the army, the judicial systems are all
Yeah.
controlled by the cartels.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
No, it's an awful situation. So people should know what's going on down there. Let's get to the next one here.
sin nombre.
Okay.
No podré olvidar el ladrido de los chuchos cuando comían a los muertos que se quedaban tirados en los caminos. Los chuchos también se comieron mi nombre.
Without name. I will never forget the barking of the dogs as they were eating the bodies of the dead left on the roads. The dogs also ate my name. Again, what a poet can do, what a poet can do to bring these kind of images, but also emotive powers from people. This is very emotionally powerful, but he uses the right words at the right place in the right space. So I want to say this because it reminds me of really quick with my dad, just to make a connection. My dad grew up during the Mexican Revolution. And it was 1910, and actually there was two revolutions. One, the Big Night Revolution to 1920, and then there was the Cristero Rebellion.
Oh, right.
And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
many people died. So people don't know that there was over 1 million people killed and 1 million refugees, which is why a lot of Mexicans ended up in the United States during that time. And Mexico at the time had the same population as Guatemala has now. So it was quite devastating, just like, any of the civil wars in Central America were devastating to these people. And the United States had a big role in everything else. But the reason I'm mentioning that is because what this reminds me of, my dad was a very quiet, detached, muy frío in his emotional connection. I almost get why. The way he grew up, the world he grew up, and he never told any story. My mom told all the stories. My mom was a great storyteller. My dad wouldn't tell anybody. He did tell me one, that when he was like 7 years old, he witnessed a man being chased and then killed with machetes, which is one of the worst ways to die, as you know.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know why he told me that. He just had this one story, and I'm sure he saw a lot of other things. When you're growing up, he grew up during the Mexican Revolution, and the things you witness, the people being shot and killed. And I think about that because I think about when I've been to Central America and the civil wars there and the impact of children and the way the children grow up and how they have to carry this pain and they have no place to take it. That's the thing. There's really no healing work there. Maybe you could speak a little bit about how that impacts the Guatemalans who are still there, who are still trying to better themselves and still have to carry pain that they can't deal with.
What's interesting is the leadership, leadership is lacking, leadership with consciousness, because what they happen is they get seduced by power and money. So this is what they're looking for, instead of creating leadership that lasts, and to me, like the changes that you need to have in Latin America in order for the thing to right itself, it's going to take many generations and I've been thinking about this since the early 70s when I was considering going back to Guatemala, and I was thinking it's going to take about 150 years, I figured out, to actually course correct what had been put in place since the beginning of the conquest. And to this day, that's even more true, but you have to cultivate, you have to start school, you have to restore the arts. In many places, there are no schools, there's no potable water, there's no medical resources, so you have to take care of the people in some form in order to be able to have anything. Otherwise, that's just why they're all coming here. Though they want to immigrate, they want to migrate somewhere.
Yeah, they got to migrate to better places. People don't quite understand that this is a natural part of what human beings do. One thing that's important, I've been going to Central America at least since the early 80s. I was there in Nicaragua and then Honduras. I ended up being in the middle of the Contra War. So I covered that for a while. I was a journalist and I was able to cover a number of things going on. And then I came back to El Salvador, especially when El Salvador had just had the courts and then the deportation of all these gang kids from LA. Right. And so I was going back there to work with them, talk to them. They were all cholillos like me. So cholos, they were all la vida loca. They were very close to the culture that I grew up in. So I was able to relate. And I came back several years after that, and then I ended up in Guatemala and worked with the same Maras there. I went to 10 prisons in El Salvador. I went to 2 prisons in Guatemala, meeting with the Mara youth. And they were very good talking to me. I mean, you could imagine, why is this Chicano doing here, But many people who know my story, some of them have read Always Running. We brought Always Running down to Guatemala because they can't sell them there. So I brought boxes. They sold like crazy, and people they could relate. La vida loca is what it's called in Spanish. Yeah. And then we ended up in Honduras. My wife and me ended up teaching poetry in San Pedro Sula for a month to abandoned girls and to another school with a lot of the local kids. So I have a very beautiful, amazing relationship with Central America that I find very important for me. And as you know, our communities now are Mexican and Central American. They used to be mostly Mexican, that was it. Central Americans are very much integral to these communities, so you have to say that. I can't just say they're Mexican, and now you have to say
No.
Mexican Central America because they're now part of our communities.
They had to do desperate things in order to survive. And now you have to figure out how you're going to pick up the pieces. I mean, part of the social structure in a lot of the native communities, you have what you would call a medicine society or a clan that is in charge of really developing the ritual structure that allows you to relate not only to the communities but to the land around you. And all those ceremonial ritual obligations have been destroyed, not only by the Christianization of the native peoples, but also by everything else that's come into play. And it's like there's a sterilization of the culture that has happened through missionary work. And now with the Christian, at least the Catholics, there was a lot of syncretism, right? But with the evangelicals, it's like a sterilization of the culture. So to me, a lot of the violence that exists in Guatemala is due to the fact that everything that's culturally and living, like their roots to the earth, are being completely cut off. So they're going to blow up. And I mean, a lot of the patterns of violence are directly related because the ceremonial social structure that the old rituals provide doesn't exist anymore.
And you know, maybe just to add, when I was there the last time, the evangelical, mostly coming from the U.S., the right-wing end of it. I'm not against Christians who love Christ and take the message of Christ. I'm talking about this very highly politicized right-wing coming in there. They're all over Mexico and Latin America. But in Guatemala, it took the form of them calling for the social cleansing of gang members. And as you know, when they mean social cleansing,
Well, it just means, yes.
let's kill them. And we did know of some of the church people. These are God-fearing church people going around killing these tattooed gang kids. And that's something that we heard, we saw, people told us these stories. That is the level of pain that we're dealing with.
Yeah, of course. I mean, we'll get to one of this, but I mean, to me, one of the massacres, Rios Montt, Efrain Rios Montt,
Who was an evangelical.
he was an evangelical. And how can you go to church on Sunday, and pray to Christ, and then go responsible for slaughter of thousands of people? That is inconceivable to me.
But it comes, I think, from the Spanish too, who were able to
exactly.
justify.
Well, of course.
They just detach. These people are heathens. These people don't belong. They're savages. Just kill them, and then not think twice about it, because in heaven they'll be redeemed. Whatever, they got a way to make up whatever they want to make up about this stuff.
The doctrine of discovery. That's part.
Well, we've been talking about it a lot. The doctrine of discovery, just so people know, we talked about it here. It came out a year after Columbus ended up going, and a year later they were dividing the land, and they were agreeing. There was two popes that sustained it. But it was a papal bull that said that they had a right to destroy or undermine or kill off, whatever they do, the non-Christians. Most native peoples were non-Christians. But here's the sad thing, even when they became Christians, they still killed them. It didn't really matter.
That was the Inquisition too, so it wasn't, I mean, that was really crazy. We'll go to Los Colores.
All right.
Los Colores. Si tuvieran que pintar la guerra, ¿de qué color la pintarían? Una dijo de verde, otra de rojo y otra de negro.
Colors. If war were to be painted, what color would it be? A woman said green, another red, and another black. What does that evoke? I mean, how do you give color to war? How do you give color to the bloodshed? How do you give? It's interesting how he says these things, but I don't know. I find this very. This poem stops me cold. What do you think about it? I mean, it's just one of those poems that just gets you like you're arrested.
It doesn't matter no matter how you look at it, war is not a thing that you want to do, because it destroys everything, So it doesn't leave anything in its path.
Yeah.
It's non-productive, non-regenerative,
No.
So.
And we've constantly been at war in this country, and still in the Middle East and everything else, but also because we participate. That's the thing people need to know. We participated on the side of the governments in the civil wars.
Yeah.
And that's important because this is our country, putting our tax dollars to a side that was keeping the oppressive systems in place.
Yeah.
And something we have to challenge or something we have to fight against, trying to change the war economy that we're all based in. Regardless of what people think, oh, this country is a war economy. We have the largest defense budget in the world, and we actually have more than most of the countries combined. So it's really mad how we carry that on and don't think twice about it, because that continues to be in the budget and nobody
Right.
challenges it. But largely it impacts people like in Guatemala and other places, in the Mideast, wherever in Africa, wherever we happen to think there's a problem,
Yeah.
war comes in. Wow.
So, and based with the, this is gonna, I know this is intense, but this poem to me, the next one is very interesting
yeah.
in the wake of everything that's happened, especially with the uncovering of the bones in all the school, in the Carlisle school, and all the missionary schools, and especially I was at a Zoom call with some friends in Canada, and they figured out that in Canada alone, they estimate that about 250,000 kids got killed from the boarding schools and buried without any record at all, you know. So it's just really interesting to how this tragedy keeps getting perpetuated no matter where you go. And these are the things that we, as a legacy, we want to move on from there, and we don't want the children that are alive now to inherit that, you know, and we want them to feel protected, engaged, and so that they can actually survive and thrive, you know.
So before you read the poem, let me do another story.
Yeah.
So my mother's roots are Raramuri, Tarahumara, out of Chihuahua, Mexico. That's a very important tribe. People heard of the Tarahumaras, they're great runners. They've done marathons. They mostly ended up in the Copper Canyon, which is actually 6 canyons. As a system, it's deeper than the Grand Canyon. And 80,000 live in caves. Now, they were there leaving the Spanish because they had all these rebellions and the Spanish, you know, knock them around, and they ended up being there. Well, my grandmother and my great-grandmother, they were starving during the Mexican Revolution because they're always starving up there. So they came down to Chihuahua City. There's a ghetto called La Tarahumara. It's still there because I visited. I've been to Copper Canyon and to this ghetto. And the Catholic Church kidnapped them. They never went back. And that's what they do. What they do is they feed you, they're starving, give you shelter, they change your name, tell you not to speak the language, and dress you up. What they call a Tarahumara dress is actually the dresses that the Catholic Church gave them, but they call them Tarahumara dresses. I've seen them. They're really long print dresses. You've seen them. They're really from the church.
Oh, wow.
And they never got back. And I'll tell you really briefly, the ghetto, La Tarahumara, people lose all their traditional ties. So they're alcoholics, they're diabetics, they're heart disease, they beat their wives and kids. This is not what they do in the Sierra. The Sierra Tarahumara, I've been there, people are beautiful to each other, they speak their language, they relate to the land, they don't beat their kids, their wives, they don't have any of that kind of way of thinking. They're healthy. People have studied at Duke University and other universities have gone down there and studied why are these people so healthy. They walk for miles, they do the running, they're just, but as soon as they leave and become civilized, they're done for. So anyway, let's read this poem.
Dolor a flor de rostro. Y otra vez la llama del recuerdo vuelve a encenderme la memoria. Con el dolor a flor de rostro, con la mirada hecha pedazos, mi gente con sus uñas escarba la tierra. Y la madre tierra descubre sus muertos, y los huesos salen a gritar, a contar con voz de espanto el terror de esos días, de esos años, de ese siglo que apenas terminado ayer. Y el viento desparrama el eco. ¡Ah, Camisanel! ¡Ah, Camisanel! ¡Ah, Camisanel! Asesinos, asesinos, asesinos. Si los huesos de los muertos hablan, ¿por qué vamos a callar los vivos? Que su memoria se mantenga encendida y que la llama del recuerdo no se apague nunca. No más sangre, no más dolor, nunca más. A la orilla de una fosa abierta, Nevach 2000, año 2000.
Pain blooms in the face. Once more a flame returns and revives my memory. With pain blooming in the face, with a shattered gaze, my people with their nails dig into the ground. And the earth mother reveals her dead, and bones rise up to cry out, to tell us only the dead can, the terror of those days, of those years, of that century, barely over yesterday. And the wind scatters the echo, and I can't say these words, they're in
Camisanel.
Acamisanel, acamisanel, acamisanel. Murders, murders, murders. If the bones of the dead speak, how can we, the living, stay silent? May their memory stay alive, and may the flame of remembrance never go out. No more blood, no more pain, never more. And this at the bottom says, at the side of an open grave, Nebach, year 2000. Whew.
That was the massacre of the Ixil Maya that was perpetrated by Efraín Rios Montt. That's when they dug it up and they finally admitted.
How many bodies did they find?
I think it was anywhere from 2,000 to 3,000, but that was one of many, something like that. So it
And
was,
this is recent. People have to
Yeah.
understand. The poor Mayan people have suffered for centuries, but this is recent stuff.
Yeah.
This is within our lifetime.
Yeah.
This is not so this is such a beautiful, important, painful to read and powerful poem.
yeah.
Just because it carries that so well.
So Humberto, when I met him, he was very reticent to talk to me for a number of reasons. Mostly because I lived in the United States, but he said we met, and I brought this today because this is my sister gave me a book of his poetry in 1995 as a Christmas present. So I started lugging it around, and we would go to retreats and read a lot, and I would just off the cuff just start reading from the book, and that a lot of the translations, have come from this relationship. So I talked to my sister because I wanted to meet him. Robert Bly said we have to get him going. We have to get him going. So I went and met with him, and we met in a cafe at the main square in Guatemala City. And I told him what I wanted to know. He knew who Robert Bly was, and he said, cool. But he said, I have to ask first. I have to ask permission first. So, and we had a really good lunch, and we got along really well. And about a month later, I got a fax from him. And the answer, it was very simple, one sentence, El fuego dijo sí. And the answer was the fire said yes. So what he did is he went to his elders and they did a ceremony and said permission for this thing to go through, because and the reality is everybody carries medicine, each culture, that right now we all have to share the medicine that we carry and we have to move forward. Which to me is the beauty of how he's willing to, in spite of the pain. I mean, Luis and I both have a lot of years spent with Native American medicine from this country. One of my teachers was a Creek medicine man from Oklahoma. And he would say to me and to this group that we were working with, because it's hard for me to teach non-native peoples, but I have to do it because it's the only way to move through. And we are in the throw, and where we live today is we have to uncouple from the legacy of conquest, and through participating in ceremonies, and by doing this thing, we keep changing that inheritance that we have that creates a lot of the turbulence that we're in right now. We'll be able to leave that behind, and it's going to take generations. But anyway, so this is to me, this is hope. Un libro. ¿Cómo deseo que llegue el día cuando en este país, y está hablando de Guatemala, todos anduvieran armados de un libro? Page 52, 53.
Yeah, I'm going to read it in English, but that is such an important thing. So, a book. How I wish for the day to come when in this country all walk around armed with a book. And let me tell you, in this country too.
Yeah.
Having a book is important for everybody to read, to be educated, to know. Well, there's books in nature. I mean, that's the main thing about indigenous people. They always had knowledge. Their university was nature. But as you know, we live in a world in which people hold these books. And I found books, for me growing up, is the only saving grace I had if it wasn't for books. And now we've created in this beautiful space at the Achuchas, and just to remind people, we're here at the Achuchas. It's a great space. We have a bookstore, the only bookstore for 500,000 people. And we have a great performance space, and we have some workshop centers. We have art on all the walls. please donate to Tia Chuchas because we want to keep this place going forever and ever. And we bring in these kind of dialogues. We bring in especially the indigenous ancestral knowledge that's important for us to know, but also to talk about how it impacts the world that we're in now, as Humberto Cabal had. So this beautiful poem puts that lesson, how powerful it would be if everybody had a book in their hand, not a gun, not drugs, not all these things that people have, that they had a book.
Yep.
And you know, just by the way, in this community, like all these communities, you can get a gun anywhere. You can get any drugs you want. I don't care how many drug laws there are, guns, drugs everywhere, but it's very, almost impossible to buy a book. We have the bookstore for this community. Can you imagine all the other ones that you go for miles and miles and you can't get a book?
It's like finding a refuge in the middle, and during after the fall of the Roman Empire,
Yeah.
you would find these monasteries, that would have the I guess you could say the citadels or the protectors of culture. So this is a center where the culture is being protected, and
exactly.
so it's a
But I also have
sanctuary.
to say that one
Yeah.
good thing, and shout out to my librarian friends, the libraries.
Yeah,
It's one of the best things this country ever did. The public library. Public libraries didn't start with us, but it really picked up, and almost every neighborhood has a public library. And I will have to say how powerful that was. But there's a difference between lending books and getting them, bringing them back, and owning books. It'd be really good for people to know how to own their books and savor them the way that I've learned how to do. So yeah, very beautiful.
we're gonna share some of you some of the poems. This one's gonna be, I'm gonna read it in Quiche first, and then in Spanish, and then Luis will read it in English, so you get a sense of what the language actually sounds like. All right, Rikih. Rikih kunim reib chu ushol rishot. Kukri uhanalik sha karach kulil. Kasko chupan reri kachoch. Ka sakamakik are hampa kulilo. Rukri uchach re usakil. Che sibalach sak ri kamebayil.
Ooh, that's so beautiful. It sounds so beautiful. You want to do it in Spanish?
Yeah, el sol. El sol se mete entre tejas con esa terquedad de mirar qué hay dentro de nuestras casas y se pone pálido al ver que con su luz es más clara nuestra pobreza.
The sun. The sun gets in between the roof tiles. With that stubbornness of wanting to see what is inside our little houses. And he goes pale on seeing that our poverty is more obvious in his light. Ooh. The sun shines light on all this.
Yeah.
And speaking of all that, of course, I've seen tremendous amount of poverty in Mexico, Central America, tremendous amount of poverty, but just to make a point, it's here.
Yeah.
LA is one of the most, the homeless encampments, all these people, it's just as bad as any place in the world. And here we are, the richest country in the world, one of the fifth largest economy state, and we have so many people being pushed out. People have to understand the connections to all these things with what's going on in places like Guatemala and around the world. We're all tied in to a systemic way that the world gets displaced.
Yeah.
The world being displaced, because displacement is a modern thing.
Yeah.
And now everybody can be that way. Now we're seeing it in our very streets and neighborhoods. Wow.
Yep. Canto.
Yeah.
Canto. El abuelo de la mano lleva a su nieto a saludar a los árboles, a platicar con ellos, a acariciar su piel, a oler sus hojas. Y los árboles cantan sus nombres.
Song. The grandfather takes his grandson by the hand to greet the trees, talk to them, feel their skin, smell their leaves, and the trees sing their names. Not beautiful.
Yeah.
And I don't know if anybody's had a relationship with nature. If you get deep enough, they will sing back to you.
Oh, yeah.
They do sing, and they do come back at you. And we've lost a lot of that because the concrete world that we're in, people pass by trees and don't understand what they are, what they do.
Yeah.
There's a lot of healing power in these trees and these plants and these bushes, and we don't know. So it's important to reclaim all that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, people think about virtual reality as being a modern thing with computers, but we've been living in virtual reality since the cities got basically established.
Yeah.
So you go back thousands of years,
Sure.
it just keeps getting transformed or transmuted in some form, you know.
Yeah.
So I'm going to change the tone here a little bit because we've had Luis and I have been working together for about 30 plus years, you know.
Yeah.
And we had two dear mentors, friends, and colleagues depart. So I want to mention with a lot of gratitude and just incredible appreciation for the level of impact that he had in the culture was Robert Bly, one of them. A lot of it is we would not even be sitting here today, many of us, if it wasn't for the work that Robert spearheaded through Michael Mead and James Hillman and all this. This is how we met, and how he's basically encouraged us to break down boundaries and understand that there is no us and them. It's all us. So part of that is this, right? And Melodoma Somé also, who crossed over last week. So this will allow us to feel, these next two poems will allow us to feel that. Las maletas. ¿Te vas? Aún no. ¿Y por qué están hechas las maletas? Porque soy un viajero y en cualquier momento tendré que irme, no solo de esta ciudad, sino también de este mundo. Y de mi corazón, solo si tú abres la puerta.
Okay, give me that page.
159.
I got it.
Sorry.
It's all right, no problem. We will make this work. It was so beautiful to hear it, though. Okay, there he goes. Okay, the suitcases. Are you leaving? Not yet. Why then are your bags packed? Because I am a traveler, and at any moment I will have to leave. Not only from the city, but also from this world. And from my heart, only if you open the door. So thank you for bringing in Robert Bly and Melodoma Somé, and we've had relations with him. And I didn't really know Robert Bly as much, but he did come to, I did some readings that he actually came to and came up to me and talked to me and was talking to me about my own poetry. He understood what my poetry was about. I read a poem that became the title for Always Running, but it had nothing to do with Always Running. It was called Always Running, but it was one of the most painful times in my life. And when I read that poem, he got it, and he said, that's a powerful poem, and he encouraged me. And I was just starting out. I was just young. I didn't even know much. So I will always remember how grateful I was for that. But also Melodoma Somé, who was, I feel, a teacher and a mentor, and years and years of work that we've done with him, where he taught us a lot. I learned a lot. He's from the Dogra tribe in Burkina Faso, and he taught a lot, at least me, a lot about the indigenous mind, how it is from Africa through Asia through Europe, even the indigenous peoples of Europe and all over the Americas. You know, the way of thinking of the original peoples and how powerful it is, and how to get back to that. And he was very good about that.
Oh, yeah. The first time I met him, I had to pick him up at his house in Oakland and drive him up to Mendocino. So we got into this really long conversation. And we were talking about different things. And I said to him, you have to remember what this land was like before the arrival of the Europeans. I said, you know, there were no hospitals, there were no mental institutions, and there were no prisons. And there were no fences to go back to the border thing, right? And I said, they might not have been perfect, but what were they doing where those things were not necessary? Yeah. So I think there's a level at which we have to think about what the impact, especially with prisons, right? Mental institutions, especially those kind of things. What happens? And this kind of work for us is really seriously because the implications of how to reconfigure ourselves, how to resynchronize, get coherent with ourselves, not only that, but get recalibrated to a larger, that to me is the quest of all this, you know, so.
And just to point out for especially our young people, this is why we have places like this, to provide that clarity. Clarity is also medicine.
Yes, yeah.
And I find a very important part of what I have to do, and I know Miguel, you do, because I learned a lot from you as well, the clarity of these issues and the vitality of these ideas. Why we need to get back to them, but how important they are now. To recognize that that knowledge is still there. We still have
Yeah,
it. It's in our bones partly.
Yes,
And
yeah,
getting back to it is really important. But I think it's just important to point out young people are very lost in our communities. A lot of suicide, a lot of gang kids, a lot of kids just lost, and they don't need to be lost. How in the world do you have a society in which the youth are lost? The elders are gone, the community is not
Yeah.
there, it's fractured. This is the world that's been created, and we have to challenge that world with the poetry, with the songs, with the beautiful ideas, with the teachings. We have to challenge it.
Yeah, I mean, when I was growing up, there was adults around, but there was this kind of conversation. The generation of they were not wired to talk about these things, and we have to learn how to wire ourselves to talk about this. One of the things that I've done especially in our work with the youth, I've said to the kids. I remember at one of the retreats we were at, they asked me to do a blessing. So I had a row of about 15 all youngsters there, and I said to them, when I was your age, I didn't have a wrinkled up old gray hair blessing me the way I'm blessing you today. So I want you to be wrinkled up old gray hairs and blessing a bunch
There
of
you go.
so
They should do that.
into the future, because this is what we're seeding, and by doing all this, so it's intergenerational, but also it works its way backwards and forwards, because we're also blessing the ancestry that preceded us. A lot of the work, I got involved with Native Americans here about 40 years ago. And one of the things that I learned when I was getting ready to Sundance is the intercessor at that Sundance said to us point blank, as we were getting ready to go into the harbor, he said, your people, this is 1985, 86, okay, so the anniversary of Columbus's arrival was all that was going on. But he said to us, your people couldn't do this with us when they first came over here 500 years ago. On their behalf, you're doing it now. And that went into me like I was explaining earlier, like those little, and it just, so it's like a drive that I feel like, but it's something that got instilled, that how to recalibrate at a deep enough level so that we can actually get connected. And the coming together of the cultures, I've traveled, not a lot, but enough with different peoples, and by doing this, we're recreating the coming together of the cultures the way it ought to have happened, by learning from each other, our songs, our dances, the way we pray, the way we get food. Just look at the food, how it's been shared all over the world after the colonization. People think, when they think of tomatoes, they don't think of Central America. They think of Italy. When they think of potatoes, they don't think of Peru. They think of Ireland. When they think of vanilla, they don't think of Mexico. They think so. But it's already
Or
Chile.
even chocolate, whatever.
Whatever it is, But the earth has already done it. We're the only ones that are lagging way behind. So I know I'm getting, but I want to go back to the grief that we feel, because this is important. 74, page 74. We knew this was going to go, and
It's okay.
it's good.
It needs to.
Hay momentos en la vida en que las lágrimas son incapaces de liberar el dolor en el corazón del que se va o del que se queda.
There are moments. There are moments in life when tears are not capable of freeing the pain in the heart of the one who leaves or the one who stays. Wow. That's powerful.
So we just have to just say thank you, Robert. Thank you, Meladoma, for coming and seating us in a way, because we can share that with each other. All those songs, all these poems. This is happening. These are the gifts that we bring. Share.
And I love what you said, that we've got to create the new elders.
Yeah.
The elders that have been missing, we have to help instill in them, seed something in them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
82. So we're going to go a little bit more in a different way, just to see the world, right? So, la sombra de esa hoja de nogal camina sobre la pared como un murciélago buscando la oscuridad debajo del techo de la casa. Sobre la loma, el sol envejece un poco.
That one shadow. The shadow of that walnut leaf walks on the wall like a bat looking for darkness under the roof of the house. Over the hill, the sun ages little by little. Ooh, wow. I mean, one thing, I've been a poet for a long time, as you know, and I think poetry was always in me. But when you You can see the poetry in the language of the people who understand the depth of this, of who they are and who their people are, what the land is, what the sky is. You know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah, yeah,
And I think poets have to be so connected to be really poets.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
how
yeah.
can you do it without having some connection with all these things? Really quickly, what do you think about Humberto Cabal as a person? You knew him personally?
You know, when I first met him, he took out a piece of paper and he said he drew a line and he drew a circle, and he said, pointing to the line, he goes, "That's you," and he pointed to the circle, and he goes, "That's me."
Yeah.
And we both laughed. But he was an incredible, he had a beautiful, beautiful sense of humor about everything, you know. And we would go and just sit around and talk about anything. And he was curious about everything. And he was interesting in to figure out what is the common thread, not to reduce everything, homogenize it and commodify it, but to figure out what is alive in everything. And he saw himself as he understood how to translate what he saw so that the people could feel it, and it didn't matter who it was.
Yeah.
Tomas and I, my son, who's here tonight, we went and saw him in 2017, and we had lunch.
Oh.
We walked down to where he lived in Momocenango and went to the market. Everywhere we went, Don Humberto, how are, and everybody knew him.
Yeah.
Everybody, and he was like, and then we sat in the middle of the market, and everybody speaking Quiches, like being in the middle of this, in the middle of a beehive with that language, and everybody knew him, but they left him alone, you know. And he loved, and he said, "This is my home, right there, right in the middle of the market. You know, we're eating pepiang with tongue. You know, that's gonna."
Yeah. That's beautiful.
But he was and it was really, in the beginning, he wasn't sure about the relationship, but he had traveled enough already. But he was into connecting and into getting beyond. His poetry has been defined by some of the intellectuals in literary circles in Latin America and Europe as counter-conquest poetry. Poesía de contraconquista, which to me, it's a great way of looking. Let's get beyond instead of pointing fingers. And the one thing that he was also good at, he was not into creating another fraction, another faction, another split. You know, he wanted to create, like I said, a deep relationship, and it's all based on how to understand the earth that you live in. So, yeah.
So he's also passed, and
Yeah,
this is
yeah,
why this
yeah.
book was done. And it's sad, it's in his memory, but it's carrying the legacy that he put down. And again, another elder teacher that we've lost, but we've got to do what he was doing,
Yeah.
and we got to carry that forth. And I love that. I love that story about the language. One thing I will tell you is that I spent some time in Uchitan, Oaxaca, in the early '80s. It was a big uprisings in many indigenous communities in Mexico then, and this was like the big one, the huge. Everybody was very much talking about it. So I went down there. I fell in love with Oaxaca so much, and these were Zapoteco natives who still spoke their language. That I think it's called Ditza. They call it a certain name. They spoke their language, and I remember I was walking to Uchitan, and there was a big zocalo with trees. And all these birds, these beautiful black birds, you know, they were all there, and they were all talking to each other. You know, they were all chirping. But then I looked down and I saw the people talking, and it sounded like the birds. It was really an amazing to me. One of these magical realism moments where the birds and the people were almost talking the same language. You know, so it's just the beauty of being among people who are so tight to with each other and everything.
It's like you're hearing the echoes, like the earth is echoing the people, and the people are echoing the earth, you know, so it's like a huge conversation, yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Good.
86, now this is not what you think when you hear this poem, but this is what he said, 86. Antes yo ladraba y no recuerdo en qué sueño se me olvidó esa costumbre. Ahora hablo.
I barked. I used to bark, and I can't remember which dreams caused me to forget. Now I speak. Oh boy. How would you say this is what he's trying to
I'd say that's modernity coming in and cutting you off from your root to the earth.
Yeah.
I mean, he says in one of his other poems, you know, which is not in this book, but he says, roots tell us through the flowers what the earth is like on the inside.
Yeah.
And so that's what that is you forget how you are, everybody has an intrinsic connection to source.
Yeah.
You don't need an intermediary.
Exactly.
You don't need but you have to, we are horrible amnesiacs when we forget and we go into our orbit, we forget that this is all in our bones, in our DNA, you know?
And what I love about it is because me and my wife have a beautiful puppy, and we've had her for over 10 years, but there is a definite communication issue, not an issue, tie with us. She doesn't communicate with barking, actually. She doesn't really bark, but we still communicate.
Yeah.
She lets us know exactly what she needs, when she needs it, and we kind of have fallen into this rhythm where we know exactly what she wants. And it's kind of interesting that we have a nature with animals like this, because anybody's got dogs or cats, and you end up having that relation. You just can't help it. And people who don't have it, because I never grew up with a dog. I never had a dog like everybody else. People say, well, you never had a dog? No. Finally, when we had this dog, it hit me how tight, how really connected we are as people, as four-legged people, you know, we really are. Yeah. Amazing. Beautiful.
Oh, so let's go to 100, right?
Okay.
Los ríos platican. Los ríos platican con las piedras cuando los árboles duermen. Al amanecer, las piedras callan y los árboles cantan.
The rivers talk. The rivers talk with stories when trees are sleeping. At dawn, the stones go silent and the trees sing. Ooh. Again, not forgetting, try to remembering all of us that we're all like this.
Yeah.
And we were at one time all like this.
Yeah.
And trying to bring back that. These poems evoke that. And I do want to say again, this is In the Courtyard of the Moon by Humberto Cabal, translated by my good friend here, Miguel Rivera, who really understands the culture, and I know because I worked with him for almost 30 years. We've done a lot of indigenous spiritual practices together. We have similar teachers, but we also did a lot of work with youth, a lot of work with men, and it's important work, and now we're work together and making this book happen. So yeah.
We should read, I want to read let's go to page 20, we'll read the title.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we have to figure out what is it. Yeah, so.
Yeah, we're getting close to the end here, but we definitely want to make sure we get this one.
So, los murciélagos y yo. Los murciélagos y yo esperábamos la llegada de la noche para jugar con las estrellas en el patio de la luna.
The bats and I. The bats and I waited the arrival of the night to play with the stars in the courtyard of the moon. Wow, that's pretty good. Did you come up with the title based on that? Yeah.
Yeah.
He didn't have original title for it.
No, he just, but we hadn't even figured it out yet. Yeah. But I realized I had to.
And the courtyard of the moon is perfect.
Yeah.
Wow, and again, just to point out that Tia Chucha Press is proud to present this book. It's been out for almost a year now, and we're really wanting to get it out, get it sold. Please buy the book. You can get at tiachucha.org/bookstore. Order the book. You can get it through our bookstore virtually, or you can come even here to get it. And if anybody has literature classes, college classes, high school classes, please order this book for your classes. I think every young person should be reading a book like this and connecting to it in the way that we're trying to convey it.
Yeah.
So that was beautiful, powerful. How much time are we looking at? 2 more minutes before, okay. So what do you think? Are we close to the end here?
We close, yeah.
Okay. What do you recommend would be a good poem to kind of end here?
We could end, let's go to La Respuesta.
Okay, all right.
We could read 2 poems or we could do 2 minutes. Let's read, do you want to read 2 more poems?
Let's read 2 more poems.
Okay, let's go to 6061, De Rodillas, right?
Okay.
And then we'll do La Respuesta.
Perfect.
De rodillas. ¿Por qué viniste a interrumpir mi vida? ¿Quién te envió? ¿Cómo has podido meterte en mi corazón? Yo no puedo arrancarte de mí. Yo no puedo vivir sin tu aliento. Ni siquiera puedo ponerme de pie. Poesía, ya ves, estoy de rodillas.
And that's an example of the modern world encroaching on our beautiful little poetry tree. But we're going to keep going because the poetry has to be bigger and stronger than all that. On my knees, why did you come to interrupt my life? Who sent you? How were you able to get inside my heart? I cannot tear you out of me. I cannot live without your breath. I cannot even stand up. Poetry, I am on my knees. When I read this, when I read the whole thing before, that was like, that's my, it's going to be my, on my, when I die, it's going to be right there. Poetry, I am on my knees. Yeah. It's important. What a beautiful sentiment that is.
Yeah, who sent you, right?
I know.
How were you able?
I know. This is great, beautiful. So let's do the next one, la respuesta.
La respuesta? Yeah. I wanted to read one more in Quiche, but we can do that some
No,
more time.
I think you should do it. Let's
Oh,
do
yeah.
it.
Let's do 205, 206, and 207. Yeah, all right. So,
205 right now, okay.
yeah.
Beautiful.
Mukuna hik. Shinokeh rinutat. Are hampa shinwaraj ri ukamina kil. Shinok are hampa shuyakan ri rachoch. Are kuch kakam ribe chorihom. Chila shinch abeh kanok. Shimban ibis. Are sin castalihpa numevoil. Shui nukutel chik shinwe tamach. Che wuhun ugutel kakanahik. Raja waashik. Kumuk kanok. Konogel ri keshkol riman kato tah. Rer che rilik ri ukas lemal hun. Enterrado. Lloré a mi padre mientras velaba su cadáver. Lo lloré cuando el féretro salió de la casa, camino al cementerio, y ahí le dije adiós. Hice el duelo y al amanecer en mi orfandad me vi solo y comprendí que para vivir solo necesitaba dejar enterrado con él todo el dolor que me impidiera seguir viviendo.
Buried. I wept for my father during his wake. I wept when the coffin went out of the house on the way to the cemetery, and there I said goodbye. I mourned, and when I woke as an orphan, I saw myself and understood that to live, I only needed to leave buried with him all the pain that could stop me from living. Oh, beautiful. What a powerful thing. And you know, we have to deal with a lot of people who have issues with fathers, and fathers is a big thing. Like I mentioned about my dad, that was a big deal. What the world can do to our fathers.
Oh, it's crazy.
Where they're absent even when they're there.
Yeah.
The abandonment of a lot of fathers, and what a powerful, powerful thing.
And it's, I mean, it's crazy. I mean, we work a lot with a lot of the youth that we work with, and we work with veterans too, and it's just insane all the legacy of father to father to father, you know, even from grandfathers, how it affects everybody. And when it doesn't just affect one person, but 20 or 30 are implicated by one particular thing, so.
Yeah, and you know, I've been working in prisons for 40 years, and that's a big issue with the guys in the prison. All of them have father issues at some level. I mean, you know.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so.
So I like to, to me, this is like a prayer, and so we'll close with this prayer,
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
so. La respuesta, 200, right? La respuesta. Abrir la tierra con las manos, llenarse de su aroma, levantar el rostro al cielo y comer el aire, esa es la paz, respondió la abuela.
The answer. Open up the earth with your hands, be filled with its scent, raise your face to the sky, and eat the wind. That is peace, the grandmother said. Ooh, what a great way to end this. This is beautiful. And I think, I hope people that are here listening, we need to do more of this. We need to keep poetry alive, but we need to keep also these conceptual ideas out there and keep them moving. We got to move differently now. We got to shift the way things are, but I think it's going to be done with the power of this poetry, the power of these ideas. It's going to shift because we're going to put forward something that's really deep in all of us. It can't shift, I think, by just doing things superficially.
No,
Everything's been
no.
done superficially. There's also so many superficial ways. I really love when young people are talking about systemic change because then you got to go all the way deep.
Exactly,
All the way.
yeah.
So I think
Yeah.
that's where we're at.
Yeah.
And I want to thank you, Miguel. You're a good friend, but also you're a great person, a translator. You also do all this great work with young people. But this is a tremendous amount of work, and I'm glad that we were able to come together, put it together. It's a beautiful book. It's a beautiful cover, by the way, always designed by a great designer who's done all Tia Chucha Press books for 30 years, Jane Burnett, who's part Native American and has given a lot of her beautiful art to our press. And just to say, please order the book, get them in your schools, do whatever you can. And if you can, please donate to Tia Chuchas. This is what we do. This is why we invite people like Miguel, very important people in our communities that don't always get heard other places. But also to point out that we have another great book that we just came out with, Edward Tick.
Oh, yeah.
Coming Home in Vietnam. Edward Tick is a healer, a doctor. He's worked with war veterans over many years. He's known for his work. He's the author of The Soul in the War. We just did his poetry book, Coming Home in Vietnam. It's a great healing book about trauma, deep trauma, similar to what this is. So Tia Chucha Press is constantly putting out amazing stuff. And next April, just to announce, we're going to do Claudia Castro Luna's book,
Great.
Cipota Under the Moon. Salvadorian American, was formerly Seattle civic poet, but also the Washington State Poet Laureate. So anyway, lots to look forward to. Gracias a todos. Thank you for being here. Lots of kamati. Please come back whenever you can. Nos vemos.
Buenas noches.